Hey. Okay, great. Well, welcome everyone. We're so thrilled to be here. Can you all hear me okay? Yeah. Okay. All right. So let me go ahead and start our presentation. Does that look good?
Looks good.
Okay. So, welcome again. We're so thrilled to be able to present here today. Both Dr. Luberto and myself have a deep interest in cardiovascular disease prevention, as well as, of course, how to change healthy behaviors in order to work towards cardiovascular disease prevention. So, today we're going to talk to you about some background on cardiovascular disease. Then we're going to go through each of the healthy behaviors, the health behaviors that help people stay as healthy as they can, as cardiac, as far as cardiac health goes. We'll talk about combining behaviors, and then we will think about how you can apply these recommendations in your own life. Okay. So, cardiovascular disease. It is not probably a surprise to anyone here, but it is in fact a tremendous disease burden across the world. So annually, there are almost 8 million deaths from cardiovascular disease across the world. In America, here, about 700,000 deaths per year from cardiovascular disease. Let's put that into context. 1 in 5 deaths in the US are due to heart disease. And the costs, the actual dollar amounts of cardiovascular disease are almost $252 billion per year. So it is the leading cause of death. And what we know, so that's pretty bad news. But some good news here is that up to 80% of premature heart disease, this also includes stroke, are preventable through healthy lifestyle choices. It's so important that we are going to go through each of those health behaviors tonight, and hopefully you can get some insights into ways to improve your own health behaviors. So, given that a picture speaks 1,000 words, um, we wanted to show you some facts and figures from the CDC, the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, which is based in Atlanta, and they're the ones who primarily do the epidemiology, the tracking of cases of various conditions across the U.S. So here is a recent portrait of heart disease across the country. So this is among adults, and it's at the county level, right? So each of the states, you can see that there is variation across different counties. And there's a couple of important points here. I want to just draw your attention here to the color intensity. This is the prevalence, right? So the number, basically the number of cases, the percentage of cases. And the lightest bars represent the lowest prevalence, and then it goes higher. The deeper the red, the higher the prevalence of cases in that county. And so, there you can pretty quickly find where we are. So, relative to the rest of the country, right, we're in a low prevalence zone. We really are kind of our whole state here. But what really is striking is the number of kind of disparities in terms of where cases tend to occur. This region here, from the south to Appalachia over here, is sometimes known as the stroke belt, right? Because stroke is also, associated with kind of heart disease and similar kind of vascular mechanisms. And there's a lot of reasons for this. We won't go into them tonight, but I would say, like, just kind of keep in mind, right, that where we are, where there's access to, health resources, access to kind of health literacy, etc., as well as things like our built environment and availability of different, medications and such, it can look really different depending on what dot on the map you happen to find yourself in.
So, to build on the good news that Dr. Milstein is sharing regarding how much control we do have over our heart health, here we're talking about what are the risk factors for cardiovascular disease and showing how many of them are modifiable or things that we can do something about. So, at least half of cardiovascular disease is associated with risk factors that we can do something about. So, certainly, there are some non-modifiable risk factors. These are things like age, with higher risk with increasing age. There are some sex differences in cardiovascular disease. We can't change our family history or genetics, and there are also differences in ethnicity. But there are also risk factors related to health behaviors that impact things like high blood pressure, high cholesterol, smoking and tobacco use, diabetes and obesity, physical inactivity, unhealthy diet, excessive alcohol consumption, and chronic stress. So the health behaviors that we're talking about here are what we're going to go into more detail on tonight and start to offer some strategies and tips for how to leverage this ability that we have to take some control of our heart health.
All right, so let's dive in. Physical activity, right? By now, we're actually it's pretty well known, right? That physical activity, let's call it your heart's best friend. It's, you know, movement. So just in general, physical activity is the broad category of any movement, any bodily movement. So as I move my hands right now, that is physical activity. This is separate of that umbrella term. Exercise is a separate subcategory. Exercise itself is a structured, intentional bout of activity intended to increase or maintain fitness. And so you can exercise, which is great, and you can also do more activity, which is simply just moving your body in any way. So bottom line here, more activity is better than less. Any is better than none. So we are now in this at this point in history, we know very clearly the cardiovascular benefits of physical activity. And of course, there are many other types of benefits, which, stay tuned for other webinars from HIPAA, and you'll learn a lot more about those things too. But in any case, in terms of cardiovascular disease and physical activity reduces the risk of coronary heart disease by 30 to 35%, lowers blood pressure by approximately 4 to 9 millimeters of mercury, improves the good cholesterol levels, enhances heart muscle strength and efficiency. So even if you are someone who does have a cardiovascular disease, by and large, physical activity can improve your heart muscle strength and reduces resting heart rate. So your heart has to work less hard even at rest when it's, your heart is a muscle. So physical activity helps to strengthen it and it makes the resting heart rate lower. So let's talk about some recommendations. So when it comes to aerobic activity or exercise, aerobic is the type of activity that gets your heart pounding faster. So moderate intensity activity is the equivalent of a brisk walk. So you can talk to someone next to you, if, imaginary person next to you. You could talk, but you couldn't sing. So the recommendation is 150 minutes a week of moderate intensity activity or 75 minutes, so half of that, of vigorous intensity activity. And this is the equivalent of a jog or a fast bike ride. And this is when you can't really talk comfortably when you're exercising, or a combination thereof. So please note a couple of things. It can be any combination of types of physical activity. There's no better or worse type of physical activity. The best one is the one that you'll do, that you like, or that you can do. And these are recommendations per week, which means that, well, ideally we're active, every day, most days of the week, etc. The recommendations come from an aggregate of your movement all week long, and so it's you can do it in any bout of time that works in your schedule in your life. Strength training. So we want to not forget about strength training. The current national level recommendations include 2 or more days a week of strength training for all major muscle groups, right? So things like your legs, your core, your arms, your your back, etc. Um, so strength training has really important benefits in terms of maintaining your bone health, your bone strength, especially as we get older. And strength training itself also has important benefits for your cardiovascular health. Flexibility and balance. So ideally, this is happening on a daily basis or near daily. This is when you stretch, right? You keep your mobility. Yoga, Tai Chi are some great examples, but these are things that really help us stay comfortable and mobile as we age. Interestingly enough, there is a 15% reduction in what we call all-cause mortality, which is death from all causes, per 1,000 step per day increase. So I want to show you what that looks like here. So this is a really neat graphic from a journal article. You can see the citation there. But the idea here is to show, basically, people will say, how many steps per day should I be doing? And, we all know that 10,000 steps per day is this sort of like recommendation that floats out there in the general knowledge sphere, and that is in fact based on pedometer data, right? So actual steps. And now we can get steps from like a wrist-worn actigraph, such as a Fitbit or an Apple Watch, but those aren't actually the same thing. Those aren't actually always steps, though it's a good proxy. So, how many steps should you take? Well, 10,000 steps is great if you can do that. It's about 2,000 steps per mile, so that equates to about 5 miles per day. For a lot of people, that's not realistic, and in fact, it's not necessary for most people, right? So here's where we're illustrating this 1,000 step increase per day. There's that 15% reduction in all-cause mortality. So if you go from 0 steps to 1,000 steps, right, your risk decreases. And it's about half that, right? A 500 step per day increase is a reduction of about 7% cardiovascular disease mortality. But again, more is better than less, any is better than none. So the way that this graphic here works is this little green guy is stepping, and as his steps increase by 1,000, right? These are the 1,000 step increments, the mortality risk decreases. So you really, what we're seeing, again, it varies per person and it's all relative to your baseline, but approximately 7,500 steps per day does seem to be a good benchmark for cardiovascular benefits. And then more than that typically does have benefit until you get to about 15, 20,000 steps a day. And then you just want to be aware of other risks such as injuries.
So, in terms of diet and healthy nutrition, again, a lot that we can do to protect our heart. Two of the sort of primary dietary approaches that we know are helpful are the DASH diet and Mediterranean diets. The key components across these are high levels of omega-3 fatty acids, high, oh, we skipped ahead.
I'm sorry, Tina. I'm
That's
trying to get out of
okay.
your way, and in fact, I'm getting more in your way.
No problem.
Does this look right?
We skipped the previous one, but I think, yeah, here we are.
Mm,
So high fiber, high antioxidant rich foods, and lean proteins. We want to limit saturated fats, trans fats, added sugars, and processed foods. So, a way that I like to think about this sort of easily is I tell people we talk about eating the rainbow, eating colorful foods that often are things like fruits and vegetables and less of sort of the tan, beige, white foods that are often highly processed. And we can go to the next slide for a bit more information here about sort of the benefits. So, the Mediterranean diet, we know through research, shows a 30% reduction in major cardiovascular events. So, again, this is really emphasizing sort of those omega-3 fatty acids that we find in the things like olive oil, nuts. It's emphasizing fish for lean protein, fruits, and vegetables. And a lot of these nutrients and foods have been shown to have anti-inflammatory properties, which is an important biological mechanism, inflammation that impacts our cardiac health. And similarly, another mechanism here is that these foods can improve endothelial function. The DASH diet was specifically designed for people with hypertension or high blood pressure. And research shows that it does reduce blood pressure by 8 to 14 milligrams per mercury. And this emphasizes again sort of the rainbow, fruits, vegetables, colorful foods, and also whole grains. And particularly to target hypertension, it's low in sodium. And so we try to keep our sodium count below 2,300 milligrams a day. And research shows that this also does reduce sort of the bad LDL, low density cholesterol.
Okay, so again, this probably is not a surprise to anyone at this point in history, which is great. It's been a public health triumph, really. But smoking cessation. So, smoking in general, overall, causes about 1 in 4 cardiovascular disease deaths, and secondhand smoke exposure also increases the risk of cardiovascular disease. So, in terms of cardiovascular disease, the risk is 2 to 3 times higher for people who smoke. And let's talk about then the benefits of quitting, right? So in terms of quitting, if you are a smoker or if you love someone who's a smoker, after 20 minutes, the heart rate and blood pressure drop. After 12 hours, carbon monoxide levels in your body normalize. 2 to 12 weeks, your circulation improves, your lung function increases, right? So the bottom line here with all of these health behaviors is it's never too late. If you want to make a change, it is never too late. After a year, heart disease risk is half of that of someone who continued to smoke. After 5 years, stroke risk is reduced, and then after 15 years of post-quitting, coronary artery disease risk does equalize. So,
Another tool we have in our arsenal to protect our heart health is to manage our weight as best we can. So 37% of adults in the US are currently overweight, with 42% having diagnosis meeting criteria for obesity. And even just 5 to 10% weight loss can significantly reduce cardiovascular risk. So, some of the benefits of maintaining healthy weight are reductions in blood pressure, improvements in cholesterol. So, again, that lower LDL or bad cholesterol. We also reduce our diabetes risk when we manage our weight. We see that reduced inflammation again, as we mentioned, is sort of a mechanism of heart disease. We see improved heart function, less strain on the heart. And also, really importantly, I think just an improvement in our quality of life, just sort of often feeling better, um, is important in its own right. And so we can achieve that as well with healthy weight management or weight loss.
so in terms of overweight and obesity, it's something we just want to mention that there are also differences when it comes to people of different ethnic and racial backgrounds, as well as by men versus women. So, Dr. Luberto mentioned the prevalence of obesity is, kind of in the 40-ish percent in the US currently. Um, but there are these pretty important differences. So here we're seeing, so the darkest bars are non-Hispanic white folks. The lighter blue bars are non-Hispanic Black folks. The darker green, non-Hispanic Asian folks, and then the lighter green is people who self-identify as Hispanic or having a background from Spain or Latin America. So it's interesting here that you see disparities kind of quite prominently among women when it comes to Black women, and then also kind of this dip when it comes to non-Hispanic Asian folks, and that plays out here in the totals. And overall, we do see the prevalence is slightly higher among women than men. So, in terms of challenges, right, why is it hard to lose weight or even maintain a weight that you might want to be at? There's lots and lots of reasons, right? So, for a lot of people, they are really busy, right? If they work or have caretaking responsibilities or, are in school and trying to work, any kind of combination of things in terms of time demands can make it really hard to be active, right? So by and large, our modern lives have engineered activity out, right? So we have a lot of convenience and labor-saving devices, things like dishwashers and washing machines and, you know, motorized transportation. All these things make our lives a lot more efficient and a lot easier in so many ways. And the consequence is that we have to then be more intentional about building movement back into our days. So if you're someone who goes somewhere like work or elsewhere on a regular basis, see what you can do to walk part of the way, or of course, park farther away in a parking lot. Anything you can do to add in the activity, even if it's small, little bits, oh, they all add up. Um, Walking breaks, whether you're at home or at work or somewhere else, right? Even if it's not walking, even if it's standing, kind of anything to avoid sedentary time or sitting is helpful for your heart. And very, very often, most of us feel accountable if we have to meet someone else or have someone join us for activity, right? So see what you can do to enlist your social support, bring people in, see if they'll walk with you or, do an activity with you. There's a lot more likely that we'll show up if someone else is there, right? But not for everyone. Some people really do enjoy the quiet time, and that is fantastic if that's you, but just to think about some ways to overcome barriers. Um, Sugary foods. Our food system is full of the things that our human brains evolutionarily crave, which is salt, sugar, and fat, right? We needed these nutrients when these kind of macro and micronutrients when there was a time in our human kind of evolution, our history, when we didn't know where the next meal might come from. There could have been a famine, right? And so our bodies are very brilliantly evolved to build fat stores, which can be, kind of more quickly built up by eating things like sugar, salt, and fat, because those are attractive to our brains and our bodies. And so it's actually very evolutionarily adaptive to have these fat stores because if the famine comes, you will survive. However, our current kind of modern food environment, in some ways, has kind of taken advantage of those evolutionary proclivities to want these certain things because those again are the things that tend to be calorie dense, tend to kind of add on additional weight, and tend to not be particularly healthful for our hearts. So, what are some ways that you can avoid this? It is hard. I just want to acknowledge that it really is hard to kind of navigate our food environment if you have an eye towards heart health or diabetes health, that type of thing. So see what you can do to have things on hand to grab, right? Because when we're hungry, our brain is telling us, eat. And so what we eat is whatever happens to be closest, whether or not, if it's something we may not have already automatically chosen if we had, kind of our full volition. So have the good stuff, the healthy stuff handy so that you can grab for it when you're hungry. Having people like family come together if you can to make changes at the unit level of the family. It's a lot easier said than done, of course, because everyone has different preferences, different dietary needs. All of those things are true. And if there are changes you can make as a unit, it's a lot easier than just kind of one person, um, you know, paddling upstream with a carrot, as it were. Planning meals ahead of time. I think everyone's aware of this. Also easier said than done, but if there are some simple ones that you can have as go-tos, that's usually has, lower kind of sodium and calories than eating out. Do your coworkers bring in treats to share? Yeah, if anyone's in an office, remember the days when we used to work in offices? There were always snacks. I just spoke to someone about this yesterday who said, my biggest barrier is people bringing in snacks at work. And so, we talked about this. He's going to have the snacks. He's just going to work on moderating his intake so that he doesn't derail his own goals. Yeah, and if there's a way to get healthier options in your office or wherever you happen to be, fantastic. Use your voice, right? Like it's important for everyone. It's beneficial for everyone. When it comes to sleeping and being fatigued, right? I think very many people can relate to this, and it's extraordinarily difficult. When you're tired, it can be much harder to feel motivated to do physical activity or um, to feel like you have the energy. And also, I just want to note that the fewer hours of sleep we get, it's correlated with additional calories, eating additional calories, because our bodies have a really complex and intricate network of hormones and neurotransmitters that regulate our hunger and satiety. And so these hormones, such as ghrelin and leptin, and there's many others now, but when we're tired, our brains tell our bodies go for the carbs. That's going to keep you awake. And so if you're someone who finds yourself chronically fatigued, not getting enough sleep, and you're wondering why you're eating things that maybe you didn't want to, or maybe they just look so good in the moment you couldn't resist, right? Our inhibition goes down when we're fatigued, and our bodies are telling us to kind of go for generally the sweet things or the carbohydrates. So um, consider that. And we have
Hey,
some
Rachel.
sleep tips here. Yeah.
So, someone did ask a question in the chat about cannabis use and what the risks are to the heart and if it's the same as nicotine smoking.
So inhaling any fine particulate matter is not something that your lungs are gonna, benefit from. But in terms of research, I have to be honest, it's not my area of expertise, but I will say that research on cannabis use is lagging because there was a very long time when federal funds couldn't be used to do so. So in terms of longitudinal studies, that I don't know. I'm not sure, Tina, if you have any additional thoughts on that.
I agree, Rachel, and we're gonna talk in the next slides about stress management. And so I think, one of the reasons that cannabis can be helpful for some folks is having a stress management effect. And so we'll talk about other approaches to help manage stress that just circumvent that inhalation of particles into the lungs. So moving into this topic of stress management. So there's sort of two reasons we want to emphasize this as a health behavior. One is because stress does have an impact on the heart. The other reason is because stress can also have an impact on the health behaviors that we've been talking about. So one of the other things that can make it hard to choose healthy foods or make time for exercise is often because we're so stressed. And so managing chronic stress can really have a beneficial effect on our health, on our heart health, and on our health behaviors. So we're talking here about chronic stress. So chronic, prolonged, repeated stress does have a significant impact on the heart. Chronic stress increases our blood pressure and our heart rate. It elevates cortisol and it elevates that inflammation we've mentioned. It can promote these unhealthy coping behaviors, unhealthy health behaviors, contributes to atherosclerosis, which is one of the leading causes of cardiovascular disease, and it increases the risk of heart attack and stroke. So, again, good news. There is a lot that we can do to more effectively manage chronic stress. Some of these approaches are listed on the bottom here. These include things like mindfulness meditation, eliciting the relaxation response, using our social support, and as much as we can, getting restorative sleep. So I'm going to talk in a bit more detail about mindfulness meditation, which overlaps with techniques to elicit the relaxation response. So just for a little bit of background on this, the relaxation response is the part of our nervous system that is responsible for resting and digesting and restoring the sort of health of our bodies. And this is sort of the opposite system to what many of us may already be familiar with of the stress response or the fight or flight response, which is where our body sort of amps up to prepare us to respond to danger or threats, to fight, flee, or freeze. And sort of like with food, this stress response is very evolutionarily adaptive. We need our bodies to be able to mobilize and respond to threats to keep ourselves safe. But the challenge is when we're sort of always in that stress response state, and we need ways to be able to elicit that relaxation response state to move our body into the ability to rest and digest and heal. So, any activity that promotes a single pointed focus where we just set aside distractions and keep bringing our attention back to that single activity can elicit the relaxation response. And this can be a lot of different things for different people. And so part of my main recommendation here is sort of just find what works for you. For some people, cooking can be relaxing, or gardening, or being with their kid or their pet. And so just starting to take notice of what types of activities really hold your focus and sort of bring your body into a more of a relaxed state. And know that that matters, that that's not frivolous, it's not selfish, it's actually a physiologically important activity for your well-being. And so again, mindfulness meditation is one specific type of stress management technique that can bring us into the relaxation response, and it can also have some other benefits for our thoughts and our emotions that can help to reduce stress. So I'll talk about mindfulness as a specific strategy in a little bit more detail now.
There is one more question in the chat, kind of around that smoking idea, but specifically about vaping, and is that any better than nicotine smoking or marijuana smoking?
It's a great question. I'm thinking about our HIPAA colleague and expert in tobacco use and vaping, Dr. Strack, and maybe this is a good topic for a future webinar. My understanding is that in some spaces it's considered harm reduction, but it's outside of my expertise, and so I don't want to say more definitively about that. But maybe Dr. Milstein has more thoughts.
Yeah, so the experts are also not able to give you like a good answer to that question. I mean, in terms of the fact that it doesn't burn, it's not combustion that you're inhaling, there the risks are different. It is not safe. It actually it can lead to lung scarring and tissue damage. And of course, the lungs and the heart work together, right, when it comes to blood flow and oxygen flow. So non-combustion is good. Vaping is not a fully safe strategy. And I think that's probably about as far as like people would be willing to go in terms of that. Ideally, ideally you would, one wouldn't be vaping, um, and still in some ways different than smoking.
So, talking just a little bit more about stress management as a health behavior for our heart, just want to sort of outline and maybe normalize for anyone here who experiences this that there is what we describe as this sort of bi-directional link between our heart health and sort of our stress or mental health. So, for people who may have cardiovascular disease or risk factor, living with this type of condition can, in a way, sort of create stress or anxiety. We might be sort of worried about our health. We might feel sensations in our chest and have anxiety about them. We might experience limitations to our physical activity or our day-to-day activities because of the condition of our heart. And as a result, feel more stress, more worry, more sadness, or other sort of difficult emotional feelings. And then in the other direction, for whatever reason, if we're having this high stress, these negative emotions very commonly, then that can feed back to impact our heart health in a couple of ways. One is that, again, when we have these difficult stress levels or emotional states, it's much harder to engage in healthy behaviors that would protect our heart. And we also know that stress, anxiety, depression can increase some of those biological pathways we mentioned, such as increasing inflammation in the body, which can impact our heart health. And so it's sort of a cycle that can sort of go around and around, but we can break this cycle by learning ways to manage stress more effectively. So sometimes when I talk about this, folks sort of um, might come away with the idea that it's really bad to be stressed or start if they're worried about their heart to have like a fear of stress. And I just want to sort of put that to rest and just let us know that, not all stress is bad. As I was saying before, we need the ability to have a stress response, to have difficult emotional feelings as well. Those are sources of information for what we care about and what we need in our life. And so our goal is to manage stress, not to eliminate it. Eliminating stress is not something we can or really would want to do. And we know this from a law called the Yerkes-Dodson law, which is shown on the left here, which shows that it's really at a middle ground level of stress, a medium level of stress, where our performance in the world is most optimal. We need some level of care, of concern, some level of stress to motivate us to do the things that are important for us. If we don't have any stress, if we don't have any worries, no cares, we might not really do much. We might not find that motivation to eat healthy or try to lose weight or try to quit smoking because there's nothing really motivating us. And also on the other side, if we have too much stress, then our performance decreases again as well, right? So if we're too stressed or anxious or depressed, that also can make it hard to quit smoking, change our diet, etc. So it's not stress that's bad. It's it's when we either have too much stress, which can come from what we call this top right graph says repeated hits. So this is when we just keep getting stressor after stressor after stressor, which is sort of how our current environment can set us up a little bit. We always have emails coming through. We always have kids or partners or pets asking for things, and so the stressors just sort of keep coming. And then what can also happen is we can have a stressor that's significant and just sort of stay in that stress response. And so what we can do in both of these situations to keep the stress level back at a healthy medium amount is use techniques like mindfulness or the relaxation response to bring us back to a healthier baseline over and over again to reduce that load of stress.
Tina, there is a question in the chat regarding stress. Can you accidentally induce more physical stress through too much activity? My PCP referred to a term called an altered window of immunity. Is there a threshold?
Interesting. I haven't heard the term of an altered window of immunity. I think that we do talk about an activity rest cycle where it's important to be able to return from activity into periods of rest. And so, if we do overdo physical activity, it can create more stress on the body. It can also create more psychological or emotional stress if we're putting a lot of pressure or high expectations on ourselves. And so, I think that sort of that balance between activity and rest is a nice way to approach it from a stress management perspective.
I can add too. So I wasn't sure if this participant was mentioning like physical activity or like immune activity, but stress and immunity have a very close relationship too. There's a field called psychoneuroimmunology, which helps us understand how the physiological stress response is connected to and influences our immune system, right? And so it is the case that higher levels of stress can reduce our ability to fight, um, you know, immune invaders into our system. So I'm wondering if that might have something to do with it too. But either way, it's not something that, you've done wrong, right? Like this isn't a blame situation. This isn't something like, oh, if only I could have controlled my stress better, I wouldn't have gotten sick. I mean, we've all had that thought, but what it is more of is your body telling you this is too much. You're over here somewhere. And let's see what we can do to use those skills that Dr. Luberto is talking about to climb back up this hill and find ourselves somewhere in this optimal stress area. Because our bodies will respond, right? When we're able to use these stress management techniques. Our bodies will respond in positive ways. Was there another question, Annika?
Nope, that is it.
Awesome. Okay. Oh, Tina, was there anything more you wanted to say about mindfulness?
I was going to give a little bit of background and see if we have time, we could do a short practice to sort of teach what this really means, but um, I can move through it a bit quickly, just noticing as we're getting toward the end of our hour. The way that mindfulness interventions are brought into healthcare is through it sort of originated in a program called mindfulness-based stress reduction. And the idea is that mindfulness is about paying attention to the present moment with an attitude of non-judgment. And so on the next slide, I sort of teach it as like often how kids are already moving through the world, right? They're on a walk with their adult, and the kids are just sort of noticing the sun and the trees, and they're holding your hand. But us adults might have our mind full of other stuff, like bills and things at home and things at work, and we're not really present in the moment. We're really living in our minds. And this is very common, but again, something that we can learn to sort of rein in a little bit.
And the first step is noticing, right?
Absolutely. So just simply noticing when you're thinking, worrying, daydreaming, sort of out of the present moment, that's your cue that you can start to find something in the present to return your attention and bring it back. And there's a lot of ways that we can practice doing this. On the next slide, we sort of categorize these techniques into formal and informal practices. So we could take anywhere from 1 to 2 to 5 to 20 minutes out of the day, whatever you have time for, to set aside time and do what we call a formal mindfulness practice, like the body scan, awareness of breath, or just a sitting meditation. And we'll do one of these together in just a moment so you can see what this actually means. But I also like to let people know that you can get these stress management benefits of mindfulness without taking any extra time out of your day. And this is by choosing an activity you're already going to do, like walking to the train, cleaning up after dinner, exercising, and setting the intention to keep returning your attention back to that activity over and over again when it wanders to something else. So when you're cleaning up the kitchen and you start thinking about, oh, what am I going to make for breakfast tomorrow? What am I going to pack for lunch? Noticing that that's where your mind has gone and returning it back to the act of cleaning by actually noticing what objects am I seeing in front of me? What scents do I notice? What do I hear right now? And just returning back to that present moment over and over. There's a lot of research that supports the benefits of mindfulness interventions for heart health. On the left here is a paper that included 16 clinical trials of over almost 1,500 people and found that compared to people who did not participate in a mindfulness training program, those who did reported greater improvements in stress, anxiety, and depression, and also lowered their blood pressure. Um, One of the research teams that I was collaborating with, we recently published a paper also showing that mindfulness interventions do improve these health behaviors that we've been talking about. So here we found improvements from mindfulness interventions on sleep, physical activity, and smoking cessation. So just to sort of give a
Well,
bit more
Tina,
support
before
for
we move
why.
into the mindfulness activity, there is one question about the research, and this person's asking, as a cancer survivor, is there a study that corresponds stress management thresholds with too much activity if you have an already stressed immune system?
It's a good question. I haven't seen a study like that. It seems similar to the question we were sort of asking about that Dr. Milstein was talking in terms of psychoneuroimmunology. So it's a little outside of my scope. I'll let you say anything that you might know, Dr. Milstein, but I'm not sure about that.
Well, I just want to clarify is the question how much mindfulness or meditation should I do? Like number of minutes per day? Because we do have some answers there. Um, or actually, Annika, could you read the latter half of the question if you
Yes.
still have it?
Is there a study that corresponds stress management thresholds with too much activity if you have an already stressed immune system?
So, okay, I'm gonna separate this a little bit. So if we're talking about physical activity, right? So you don't want to overdo it. That is true, right? If your body is if you are immune compromised, the recommendation is always exercise as tolerated, do the activity that you can. But I do think, Tina, it might be beneficial to talk a little bit about dose, like the kind of the dose response when it comes to mindfulness and meditation, right? Because there are an awful lot of studies looking at that. How much should I be doing, so to speak? No one size fits all answer, but there are some suggestions.
Sure, absolutely. So, what we know is that the more we practice, the more it helps. But any practice is better than no practice. And sort of similar to some of the suggestions Dr. Milstein was giving for exercise and nutrition, I take a very practical approach. What can you reasonably fit into your day? So, aiming for somewhere between maybe 5 to 10 minutes of some type of mindfulness or relaxation practice can start to make a difference. Most of these studies here that the research is based on are looking at 8-week programs where folks are going to a weekly session that's maybe an hour and a half to 2 hours long, once a week for 8 weeks. And they're often asked to do somewhere between 20 to 40 minutes of home practice each day. And so that's often a lot and not practical for many people. And there's research to show that lower doses still have benefit. So even 2-week programs are shown to reduce stress. And we also see just immediately before and after a single meditation practice, we see those reductions in stress and negative emotions. So more is helpful. You know, that's great if you have that time in your day. But even if you can just fit in 5 to 10 minutes and sort of make it a routine, that's where we can also see meaningful benefit. So I wonder as we're getting toward the end of our time, and I think it'd be great to leave any more time for question. Maybe at the end we can just close with a short meditation practice so people can have some experience and opportunity there.
Lovely, thank you. And I'll just add one last thing about what you were just saying a second ago there, Tina. But Uh, there's something called biofeedback. If anyone is interested in finding a biofeedback provider, there's a website where you can find people who are certified. But what we can observe, we can actually observe via things like heart rate, blood pressure, skin conductance, which is a different type of measure of stress, is that we can modulate our body's physiological responses, our stress response and our relaxation response by practicing deep breathing and meditation. You can observe people's heart rate going down. Blood pressure goes down after meditation and similar stress reduction activities. So, to back up Tina's point here, a little bit is a good thing as well. And some people do all the way up to things like 45 minutes a day or silent week-long retreats, right? There's a whole range of things. And all of these types of relaxation practices will help with immune functioning, though of course with cancer and cancer treatment, the considerations for immune immunity and being immunocompromised and keeping your immune system and your body safe are different. So you do want to be extra careful with your exposures. Okay, sleep. We talked a little bit about this. Poor sleep can affect your heart, blood pressure, inflammatory markers. That's the measures of inflammation in your body, inflammatory cells. Glucose metabolism. We talked a little bit about this when we were talking about hunger and cravings with low sleep, and increases stress hormones. We all know we feel pretty bad after we don't sleep very well, right? This is why. So how do you do that? Just some very basic sleep hygiene tips. So we are very trainable creatures. Our bodies really do well with a sleep schedule and a routine. Not always possible, but do what you can to try to get out of bed at the same time every day. Screens and sleep are do not mix. They are like oil and water, except that we all have them, and we try. But if you could try not to use your screen, particularly any bright light, light source near your face, in the evening or the nighttime, that will can improve your sleep because the light tells your brain that it's daytime and it's time to wake up. So try to avoid screens. Bedrooms, our bodies sleep really well, cool, dark, and quiet. Limit caffeine and alcohol. So if you drink caffeine or coffee, try to stop by 3 p.m. So that you can the caffeine doesn't affect you. It metabolizes over the course of the afternoon. And alcohol is a very bad sleep aid. It can make you feel sleepy, but what it does is as it metabolizes over about 4 to 6 hours post drinking, it has an equal and opposite effect on your body, and so it wakes you up and it gives you a pretty bad sleep quality. So, um, most adults need about 7 to 9 hours of sleep per night. Your mileage may vary. Let's skip this for now. I'll just briefly say, if you don't currently drink alcohol, do not start for heart health reasons. There's other ways through lifestyle measures that we've been talking about that reduce the risks of cardiovascular disease without alcohol consumption. Um, but if you do drink, we encourage moderate consumption, which is considered one drink or less per day for adult women and 2 drinks a day or less for adult men. And of course, excessive consumption does have cardiovascular risks. Just thinking on our time here, Tina. It would, let's wrap
Perfect.
up here.
Um, so really just wanting to emphasize that we've presented a lot of options here today. There's a lot of different health behaviors that we could focus on, and we don't want to overwhelm you. So we want to send the message that small, consistent changes are the way to go. These are the more practical, sustainable approach than trying to dramatically overhaul your health behaviors. So focusing on just one change that feels achievable to you and celebrating your progress along the way. So really giving yourself credit when you make small changes and knowing that they will add up.
All right. So, in terms of closing here, things to remember, cardiovascular disease does have lifestyle choices that can prevent many cardiovascular consequences. Small changes, we really, I think, have tried to emphasize this throughout. Small changes can make a big difference. Um, Again, these benefits start immediately. It is not too late. Is never too late. There we go. And consistency is more important than perfection. I think we all know this at some level, but it's really hard to apply that to ourselves, right? We have very high standards very often, and we would encourage you keep those standards. That is great. Keep working towards that. And what can you do in little ways each day? I want to thank our team here at HIPR for inviting us, and thanks to all of you for being here today.